I'd like to welcome you all to another session of tips and tricks. In this session, I'm just going to take a real quick look at the joint command when adding relationships between components inside an assembly. Now, from what I've gathered, not many people have started using this, or the people that I've taught haven't started using it as much as they're used to using the constraint method. Now, with constraints, you take away individual degrees of freedom to leave you with specific degrees of freedom to allow certain aspects maybe of your assembly to move. Joints, however, simplify that a little bit by taking away all the degrees of freedom that you don't need, leaving you with specific degrees of freedom that you do need. So a couple of things that I'm going to show you in this session. One is how to turn on degrees of freedom inside your assembly. So you go to your View tab and you can turn on degrees of freedom, and you'll now notice that I have a triad showing 3 translational and 3 rotational degrees of freedom on the parts that are not ground. So I'm just going to very quickly jump into the joint command. So let's open up the joints. And straight away inside here we have an option for automatic. Now, automatic joint will take into consideration the clicks that you create or the clicks that you use inside the graphics window, and then assign a specific joint relationship based on the connection selections that you've created. Or you can just go down and pick a suitable joint. Now in this instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this slider joint. So this gives me a translational degree of freedom, but 0 rotational degrees of freedom. So I'm going to select slider. Always pick the component that you're going to move into position first. So I'm actually going to select this component. I want it to sit inside this gap here. Notice my selection. I've got that little circle, which is almost like a plane. So this is telling me that I'm choosing this bottom face at this location here. Notice that when I move my actual cursor, it flips. So you need to make sure that you're picking the correct location. So I'm going to select that face at that point. I'm then going to pick its position on the front of this model on the top. And when I select that, you'll then notice that we get a small animation showing us the degree of freedom that will be left when I accept it. And we can play that animation again by selecting the animate option on the joint dialog. I'm going to select apply. Now if I just close that down, you can now see that this will only move within that specific degree of freedom. Okay, I now want to show you a nice little trick. And what I'm actually wanting to do is place this pin through this hole, but I want it to be placed in the center of these 2 faces that you can see on the internal of this cutout. Now this is a specific command that you can only really get inside the joint command. So let's have a go. So I'm going to select joint, I'm then going to select a type, and I want it to be slightly rotational, even though it might have a transition fit, for example, but it will rotate slightly. So I'm going to select the rotational joint. Now notice again, because this is a cylindrical object, it'll actually allow me to place on any of the features that you can see on this object, but I want to go in the center. So I'm going to choose the central location. And the trick now is I can right click and notice that I have offset origin and I have between 2 faces. Now the between 2 faces is the option that I want to show you. So I'm going to select between 2 faces. It then allows me to pick the first face. I can then pick the second face, and then to get it centralized so that the first connection point that I created is central to the 2 faces and concentric to the actual hole itself, I then hover over the hole and notice that it creates a temporary plane. When I select that, it'll then move the pin in position, it'll show me the degree of freedom, and it'll place it perfectly central between them 2 faces. I can then select OK, and I know that I've got the correct degrees of freedom that I may need.